January 3, 2026. Trump justifies the military operation in Venezuela as a fight against drug trafficking. The official version: Venezuelan drug cartels are sending cocaine to this. They need to be stopped. But here's a figure that destroys this whole story. 74% of cocaine enters this through Mexico via the Pacific route. Less than 10% comes through Venezuela. If Trump is really fighting drugs, why isn't he invading Mexico, which supplies 7 times more cocaine? Today we will analyze the real economics of Venezuelan drug cartels. How much is this business actually worth? Who profits from it? And most importantly, why has the war on drugs, which has lasted for 50 years and cost trillions of dollars, only increased the volume of drug trafficking? This is a story about how drugs became an economic weapon. Let's start with some numbers that will shock you. Venezuela. Official oil revenues in 2020 for $17.5 billion. This is the only legal source of currency for a country with a population of 30 million. And now, drugs. According to this Drug Enforcement Administration, about 24% of the world's cocaine production passes through Venezuela. The Venezuelan non-governmental organization Transparency estimated that drug trafficking revenues amount to about $8 billion a year, almost half of the oil revenues. Imagine a country in the deepest economic crisis. Sanctions are strangling the legal economy. Oil production has fallen by 2.5 times, and suddenly a shadow source of income of $8 billion appears annually. Money that does not pass through international banks is not subject to sanctions. Cash currency. For the Maduro regime, drugs have become not just an additional source of income. They have become a mechanism for survival. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back 30 years. 1993. The term Sun Cartel first appears in the Venezuelan press. 2 generals of the Venezuelan National Guard, Ram Gildevilla and Orlando Hernández Villegas, come under investigation for drug trafficking. Here's the paradox. They weren't trafficking drugs against this, they were working with the CIA. This was a joint operation between the Venezuelan National Guard and the American CIA to control the supply of cocaine to the United States. The idea was simple: let the drugs cross the border, track who receives them, and then target the Colombian cartels. A classic special operation. The problem was that the operation was carried out without proper coordination with the US Drug Enforcement Administration and the US Customs Service. As a result, more than 20 tons of cocaine entered the American market virtually unimpeded. The name Sun Cartel came from the insignia on the Venezuelan generals' epaulets. Instead of stars, they had suns. 2 generals with suns on their epaulets botched the CIA operation. This is how the term was born, which 3 decades later Trump would use as a pretext for war. A critically important point: this was not a real drug cartel. These were corrupt military officers who were profiting from the transit of someone else's cocaine. The 90s. Venezuela becomes a convenient transit corridor for Colombian cocaine. Why Venezuela? Geography. A long border with Colombia, more than 2,000 kilometers. Jungles, mountains, rivers impossible to control. Colombia produces cocaine. Venezuela is the ideal route for its export to the Caribbean, and from there to the US and Europe. But there is another factor: Venezuela needs gasoline for cocaine production. To extract the cocaine alkaloid from coca leaves, gasoline is needed. Venezuela has enormous oil reserves and cheap gasoline. Colombian cartels import cocaine paste into Venezuela. There, it is processed using Venezuelan gasoline, and the finished product is then shipped further. The scheme worked, but it was relatively small scale. The Venezuelan army took bribes and turned a blind eye. Individual officers profited, but it wasn't yet a state-sponsored system. 1999. Hugo Chavez comes to power. Chavez is a left-wing populist and anti-American. He sympathizes with the Colombian rebels of the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. This is a left-wing guerrilla group that has been fighting against the Colombian government for more than 50 years, and the FARC controls most of the cocaine production in Colombia. Under Chavez, the Venezuelan-Colombian border turns into a gray zone. FARC camps and bases are located on Venezuelan territory. The Venezuelan military does not touch them. Moreover, according to this Drug Enforcement Administration, direct cooperation begins. A critical turning point. The Chavez government ceases cooperation with the US Drug Enforcement Administration. American agents can no longer operate in Venezuela. Control disappears. From this moment on, Venezuelan military personnel and officials begin to systematically profit from drug trafficking. These are no longer individual corrupt officers. This is a structure that permeates the army from top to bottom. The Inside Crime Project counted 123 active and retired Venezuelan army officers who may be involved in cocaine smuggling. 123, from lieutenants to generals. The Venezuelan army has turned into a corrupt organization for drug cartels. 2013, Chavez dies. Power passes to Nicolas Maduro. Under Maduro, the system reaches a new level. Now it's not just corruption in the army, it's state policy. Here's how the scheme works. First, cocaine is produced in Colombia, in the states of Putumayo, Cacay, Norio, where FARC and other groups control the territory. Second, cocaine is smuggled across the border into Venezuela. The main routes go through the states of Chura, Apure, Aragua, and Zulia. These are border regions with jungles and mountains. 3. The Venezuelan military not only allows the cargo to pass, but actively participates in the transportation using military aircraft, helicopters, and trucks. Venezuelan ports La Guaira, Puerto Cabello, Maracaibo become export points. 4. The cargo travels by sea and air through the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and other Caribbean countries. Part goes to the USA, part to Europe. 5. The money is returned in cash or through cryptocurrencies. It is laundered through real estate, gold, and other assets. According to estimates, about 51% of drug trafficking to Europe comes from Venezuela. Venezuela is in 5th place in the world for cocaine exports, $8 billion a year. This is not pocket money. This is almost half of what the country earns from oil. Now let's talk about who specifically controls this business. The Sun Cartel. The Americans call it a drug cartel and even recognized it as a terrorist organization in November 2025. But the truth is, the Sun Cartel as a single organization does not exist. It's not like the Colombian Medellin cartel or the Mexican Sinaloa cartel with a clear hierarchy, leaders, and structure. The Sun Cartel is an umbrella term to describe a network of corrupt officials, military personnel, and security forces involved in drug trafficking. According to the CIA and the US Drug Enforcement Administration, this network includes Diosdado Cabello, Venezuela's Minister of the Interior, one of Maduro's closest associates. He is accused of organizing the murder of a Colombian politician and coordinating drug shipments. Vladimir Padrino Lopez, Venezuela's Minister of Defense. He controls the armed forces. According to this, he is directly linked to drug trafficking. Tarek El Aissami, Vice President of Venezuela until 2023. The US imposed sanctions on him for drug trafficking back in 2017. Mr. Luis Reveral, former Minister of the Interior. He is directly named as one of the organizers of the Sun Cartel. And Nicolas Maduro himself. In March 2020, the US Department of Justice accused Maduro and 14 current and former officials of narco-terrorism. The US offered a $50 million reward for information, leading to the arrest of the Venezuelan president. But the question is, if all these people are really running the largest drug cartel, why did Trump wait until January 2026 to launch the operation? Let's look at the bigger picture, and this is where things get interesting. Venezuela is not the main source of cocaine for the US, not at all. According to this Drug Enforcement Administration data for 2019, 74% of cocaine enters the US via the Pacific route through Mexico. Another 16% comes through the Western Caribbean. Venezuela accounts for less than 10%. Moreover, the main drug problem in the US is not cocaine, it's fentanyl, a synthetic opioid produced in China and Mexico. In 2023, 76,000 people died from fentanyl overdoses in the US, compared to 30,000 from cocaine. Fentanyl does not come through Venezuela, it is produced in Mexican laboratories, from Chinese precursors and smuggled directly across the Mexican-American border. If Trump really wants to stop the drug crisis in the US, logic dictates focusing on Mexico and China, but he is attacking Venezuela. Why? Because the fight against drugs is a pretext. As always in the history of the American war on drugs, let's recall history. The 1970s-80s, Nicaragua. The CIA funded the anti-communist Contra rebels. In their war against the left-wing Sandinista government, this Congress banned funding for the Contras. What did the Reagan administration do? It organized a secret scheme. They sell weapons to Iran, and the money goes to the Contras. But there's still not enough money. And that's where things get really dirty. The CIA turns a blind eye to the fact that the Contras are financing themselves through cocaine trafficking. The planes that deliver weapons to the rebels in Central America return loaded with cocaine. The cocaine goes to this. The profits go to the Contras. Journalist Gary Webb published an investigation in the mid-1990s. The CIA was aware of and actually supported this trafficking. Webb paid for his investigation with his career. He was fired and discredited. In 2004, he died under mysterious circumstances, 2 shots to the head, ruled a suicide. Afghanistan, 2001. The US invades Afghanistan, supposedly to fight terrorism after 9/11. Afghanistan produces 74% of the world's opium. After the US invasion, opium production increased 40-fold. 40 times. During 20 years of American presence, Afghanistan became the world's largest producer of heroin. Mexico. Today, the annual budget of Mexican drug trafficking is $40 billion. Mexican cartels supply 90% of the cocaine that enters the US, plus heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and marijuana. Over the past 20 years, 460,000 people have died in Mexico from drug trafficking and related violence, and 90,000 have gone missing. Trump promised to deal with Mexico during his first presidential term. He didn't, because it's not profitable. That's the economics of the war on drugs. The US spends about $50 billion a year on fighting drugs. Over the past 50 years, more than $1 trillion. The result? Global cocaine production reached an all-time high in 2023, 3,700 tons. This is 34% more than the previous year. The number of people using cocaine worldwide has increased from 17 million in 2013 to 25 million in 2023. This remains one of the largest consumer markets. 25 million Americans use cocaine at least once a year. In 2023, 30,000 people died from cocaine overdoses in this. Has the war on drugs been lost? No, because the real goal wasn't victory. Who benefits from the war on drugs? First, private prisons. There are about 2 million prisoners in this. Half of them are incarcerated for drug-related offenses. Private prisons earn billions from housing prisoners. The more people are imprisoned, the greater the profit. Second, arms manufacturers. $50 billion a year on the war on drugs means purchases of equipment, weapons, surveillance systems, and huge contracts for the military-industrial complex. Third, banks. Several major American banks have been caught laundering drug money. HSBC paid a $1.9 billion fine in 2012 for laundering money for Mexican and Colombian cartels. Wachovia Bank $380 billion in laundered drug money. The fines? Ridiculous. A fraction of 1% of the profits. Fourth, the drug cartels themselves. Prohibition creates scarcity, and scarcity creates super profits. A kilogram of cocaine costs about $1,000 in Colombia, but $50,000, $80,000 on the streets of this. A markup of 50 to 80 times. If cocaine were legal, its production would cost pennies. But it is precisely the prohibition that makes it so profitable. The war on drugs is the most profitable war for everyone involved, except for ordinary people. Now let's return to Venezuela. $8 billion in drug profits per year is a serious figure for the Venezuelan economy. But that's a drop in the ocean compared to the American drug market is worth $150 billion a year within the US. Trump says that Venezuelan drug cartels threaten American security. But here's the truth. The largest consumer of Venezuelan cocaine is not the US, but Europe. 51% of drug trafficking to Europe comes from Venezuela. The Atlantic route is Venezuela, West Africa, Europe. This is the main route. In the US, Venezuelan cocaine comes via the Caribbean route: Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Miami. But this is less than 10% of all cocaine in this. The main flow goes through Mexico. The Mexican cartels Sinaloa, Jalisco, Nuevo Generación, and the Gulf Cartel control 60% of all drug smuggling into this. If Trump's goal is to stop the flow of drugs into this, he is attacking the wrong country. But if the goal is to gain control of Venezuelan oil and oust China from the region, then everything is logical, and drugs are a convenient pretext. 3 key conclusions from this story. First conclusion: Venezuela's drug economy is a direct consequence of economic sanctions. When the US cut Venezuela off from the legal global economy, the Maduro regime found an alternative source of income. $8 billion in cash is a survival mechanism under sanctions. The harsher the sanctions, the stronger the regime's dependence on the shadow economy. This is a vicious cycle. Sanctions push the country into drug trafficking. Drug trafficking becomes a pretext for even harsher sanctions and, ultimately, for military intervention. Second conclusion, the Sun Cartel does not exist as an organization. This is a journalistic term that has been turned into a political tool. Yes, Venezuelan military and officials are involved in drug trafficking, but it is not a centralized structure with a single leadership. This is a network of corrupt individuals who act for personal gain. Calling it a cartel and declaring it a terrorist organization means creating a legal basis for military intervention. That's exactly what happened. Third conclusion, the war on drugs has never been about fighting drugs. In 50 years and with $1 trillion in spending, cocaine production has increased several times over. The number of users has increased, prices have fallen, and availability has increased. Judging by the results, the war is lost. But if you look at who is profiting from it, everything becomes clear. Private prisons, the military-industrial complex, banks, the cartels themselves, everyone benefits from the continuation of the war. Victory would mean the end of a huge business. Therefore, the war continues indefinitely. When drugs become a pretext for military intervention, any Latin American country can become the next target. Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, they all produce or transit cocaine. If an accusation of drug trafficking is enough for an invasion, no one is safe. And the most cynical thing is that the largest consumer of cocaine and other drugs is the United States itself. Without American demand, there would be no Latin American supply. The war on drugs is a war against the symptom, not the cause. As long as 25 million people in this use cocaine, someone will produce and deliver it. The only question is who Washington will choose as the next victim of its war. Follow the developments. After Maduro's capture, drug trafficking from Venezuela will not disappear. It will simply reorganize. The routes will change, new people will take the place of the old ones, and Trump will claim victory. While tens of thousands of people continue to die from overdoses in this every year, we will continue to analyze the economics behind the sensational news.